Hi, this is Natalie. Thank you for listening to Crossroads Church, where we are bringing a real God to real people. I believe you'll be inspired by today's message.
We're going to continue our series today called Disappointed Times, where we're talking about the fact that oftentimes our greatest disappointments are God setting us up for our appointed time, for the thing that he has in our future. It says we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works, which the Father prepared beforehand that you should walk in them. You're not here by accident in this space, in this time, on this planet, on this country, in this city. You are not here by accident. You have a purpose and a plan for your life. And you may say, well, I've messed up my life so much, there's no way there can still be a purpose and plan. Hey, our God is so big, he can get you right back on the right track. And that's what we celebrate every Sunday when we come together here at this church. We've seen a lot of lives there. God has done that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But I almost decided to call this message this morning, How to Be Invincible. Awkward. I thought y'all would be like, yeah. I mean, isn't that the ultimate power we want? Like, besides being invisible, isn't it the two ultimate powers? Oh, and flying? Frank wants to fly. That would be good. Everybody was like, what's the superpower you'd want? I'd want the superpower of being invincible. But I guess nobody else would. So I was going to talk about how to be invincible today because I'm convinced if you can get this down today, what I'm going to talk about, you could literally almost feel invincible, because here's what I've learned about most of what happens in life. It all comes down to what you interpret in your mind about it. There are bad things that happen in our world, no doubt. But most of the time, it all comes down to how you have interpreted it. And if you can get your mind in the right place, even the worst of situations can be turned around to have a whole new perspective. So the actual title of this message is How to Reframe Everything. How to take the view you're seeing the world from and get a whole new perspective on the world. A few years ago, I bought a really nice painting. And I say it was a painting. It was a replica of a painting, of a very expensive painting. I can't afford the real painting. I get the replica. But I paid a lot of money to put a really nice frame around it. I have no clue why framing things is so expensive. But if you've ever gotten something framed, you're like, my gosh, this is very expensive. So I got this really nice frame around it. I was like, this is awesome. I want this picture to stand out. So I got it and I put the picture in my office. Well, a few days into having it, I bumped into the picture while I was moving some furniture, and the frame came down and this giant crack came right through the middle of the glass and the picture. And I was like, oh God, but I had spent so much money and I was not going to spend more money framing. So I just hung it up on the wall with the crack on it. And the most irritating thing about it was every day, somebody would walk in and be like, hey, that glass has a crack in it. And I'd be like, yeah, thanks, Mr. Observant. I know. And it would get frustrating. Finally, I got to the point where I'm just like, I'm taking this stupid picture off the wall. But I took the picture off the wall and I removed the glass and I realized the picture wasn't damaged. It was just the frame and the lens and the glass that I was seeing it through, but the picture was fine. And so many times in our life, it all comes down to how you're looking at the picture. The picture is okay, but you're framing it up in something that looks cracked or broken. And the best way I can see to explain this is, I lead these outdoor hikes around the world. I lead expeditions all over the world, multi-day hikes. We hike to Machu Picchu. We climb the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. And I have people all the time ask me, how do you size people up who are on the trips? Do you look at them as soon as they get there and go, oh man, this one's going to be a problem, just based on looking them? And I said, honestly, I used to. But then I had this experience with this guy who came one time. He was an older gentleman. He came and he got to this Inca trail hike and he goes, hey man, I just wanted to let you know I have two replaced knees. These aren't real knees. And I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, are there going to be any stairs we're going to have to climb? And I'm like, yeah, there's about 4,000 tiny Inca stairs we have to climb on the way to Machu Picchu. It's going to be a real problem. And he's like, oh, I don't know. What should I do? And I was like, probably just stay home. But we were already in Peru. And he's like, well, I'm going to try it. And I'm like, this could go really bad. Well, we got about this hike. The challenge with this hike is once you're 2 days in and you get to a certain point called Dead Woman's Pass, it's the highest point on the trail, if that tells you anything about it. Once you get to Dead Woman's Pass, it's as far to go home as it is to go to Machu Picchu. Well, he got to the top of Dead Woman's Pass, and then he's like, okay, I'm out. And I'm like, no, you don't get that luxury, buddy. It's just as far back as it is ahead. You're moving ahead. He's like, well, can't you bring a helicopter in or something? I was like, no, I can't bring a helicopter in. He's like, well, I'll pay for it. I'm like, no, it's not that simple. You can't land a helicopter here in the middle of the mountain. Well, what do I do? And I said, well, you're going to have to get up in the morning and walk to Machu Picchu. He was like, well, what if I can't? I'm like, well, you're going to have to. And you know what he did the next morning? That dude got up and he marched himself over the next 2 days to Machu Picchu on both of those knees. And I was like, dude. And here's what I realized about it. You know, most of the time, if you can get your mind in the right place, it is truly mind over matter. You've probably been in situations like that where like you've met people that they're a mental giant. We've all had grandmas like that. They're a frail little grandma, but you know their mind. They're ferocious. Like, man, you don't mess with that lady. She may look weak on the outside, but you do not mess with that lady. That lady is mentally tough. And so much of it comes down to what's your mental toughness level. In fact, the next year we went and rafted through the Grand Canyon, and that same guy came on the trip with me. And the whole time we're rafting through, the guide was like, dude, I'm really worried about him because he's going to have to hike out. It's like 8 miles hiking out of the canyon. It's going to be really hard. I'm like, don't worry, he'll be fine. And the guide's like, no, he's not going to be fine. I do this all the time, and he's not going to make it out of the canyon. I'm like, well, I do this all the time too, and he's going to be fine. And I've seen this dude, he has the mental strength. And he's like, he's not going to be able to make it. They're going to have to call the park rangers and drag him out. I'm like, trust me. Sure enough, we get out of those rafts, and we hike straight out of the canyon, no problems. And the guides were like, what? I'm like, because he had it up here. It's over here. Most of the time, guys, it's right here. What's going on in your mind? And that's why the Apostle Paul, he says, guys, don't be conformed to the pattern of this world, but let your mind be transformed by the renewing of the word. Then you're able to test and approve what God's will is. And so many times in our lives, we get into a mental state where our mental state is just, it's taken us down. And you're living with panic and worry and frustration and anger and resentment, and everything that comes into your path, you see it in those terms because that's where your mind is. And my point is this morning, if you want to become truly invincible, I believe God shows us a way to transform our mind to where we begin to look at things in a whole new perspective. And the perspective is this: in all things, God truly is working together for the good of those who love him. But the reality is, most of the time, like, this is what happens. It's not what happens to us that makes the impact on us. It's how we interpret what happens to us. So I want to play a little game this morning, because what happens is most of the time we interpret things by what we immediately interpret them to be. We don't interpret the ultimate outcome because we don't know the ultimate outcome. So we interpret things in two ways: good and bad. Something happens to you and you say either this is good or this is bad, right? I lost my job. Bad. My husband filed for divorce. Bad. There's all these things you say, bad, good, bad, and we immediately define it, and then we start thinking that way. This is bad, this is bad, this is bad. All right? Now, you guys need to stick with me here because we're going to go into some deep stuff, but I know you can follow this, okay? I want to play a game here. I made up this little fictional character, and I like The Legend of Zelda, so I'm going to call my fictional character Link. So Link, there's this guy Link, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Link's life and some stuff that I think happened in his life, and then you tell me if it was good or bad, and we're going to kind of size up whether Link's life was, full of good or full of bad. Okay, so Link was born into poverty in a little cabin in the woods. Is that good or bad? Bad. Okay. When Link was 3, his brother died. Okay. When Link was 7, his mother died. Bad. Okay, so we got 3. We're 3 for 3 on the bad here. Okay. Well, when Link was 18, he got a job. Good. Yay. But that job only paid minimum wage. Good, bad, I don't know, whatever. Could be. Well, just a few months into having that job, his company went out of business and he lost his job. So he went looking for work. And while he was out, he went to another city to start looking for work. He gets beat up by a gang of thugs. Bad. I'm sorry, I'm taking it all downhill here with this story, right? Well, he finally ends up going to school. He gets a college education. Bad. No, I'm just kidding. And he ends up running for a political office like the dog catcher in his town, and he wins dog catcher. Good, right? It's good. He's a voted dog catcher, right? Well, then the next time around, he loses the election. Bad. I'm losing y'all. Was that good or bad? Okay. Well, then the love of his life, his first love, dies. Bad. Yeah. Sorry, it's a real downer of a story, right? Well, then he runs again for a post and he wins. And then he runs for another post and he wins. And then he ends up being the president of his country. Except right in the middle of it, his country splits in two and half the country says, we don't want to be part of the country anymore. Bad. And then he ends up having to start a war where more people die in his country from that war than any other war in their history. Bad. What if I told you that Link was Abraham Lincoln? And that's the story of his life. And you look at it and you go, well, that's a lot of bad, except that that man, thanks to him, slavery ended in America. And I think that's a perfect example, because if you look at Abraham Lincoln's life, you would probably chalk everything up mostly to bad. The guy was born with a genetic disease called Marfan's disease. It made him look really weird his whole life. It's elongated. If you look at him, he's this elongated man. It's kind of gave him an awkward look, and people didn't know what to do with him. But they say part of the reason that he was able to become such a leader was because he stood out in the way he looked, and he caught people's attention. And anyways, if you look at his life, tons of bad stuff happened. But if you look at the overall of it, we would say that was a good life. But here's the thing. If you judge it based on the particulars of his life, right in the middle of his life, you would have said, this poor, pathetic man. Little did you know that God had destined him to bring a transformation in our country that needed to happen. And here's the thing. Apostle Paul, I love this. He says, listen, we don't judge anything before the appointed time. You don't judge the end of a book when you're in the middle of it, because you haven't gotten to the end yet. You wait until the Lord comes, because he will bring to light what is hidden in darkness. He'll show you what's really been going on that you haven't been able to see, and will expose the motives of the heart. And at that time, each will receive their praise from God if they tough it out. So many times in our life, so much of what happens just depends on our interpretation of it. And the good news is you can change your interpretation in an instant when you just decide, I'm going to be convinced that God is somehow working in the middle of this. And that gives you a whole new perspective on things. And bad things happen and you go, well, God's working here. Now, let me clarify something. This is really important, okay? Because I hear a lot of people go down this fatalistic route of say, well, anything I do, God's going to turn it for good. And I do believe that, but here's the thing. You can make bad choices. And bad choices create unnecessary suffering. One of my passions in life, if you ask me what my mission in life is, one of them is this. I want to help people stop unnecessary suffering. Because I cannot tell you how many times I get phone calls that go something like this. Hey, Joel, I just drove my truck off a cliff and I'm flying through the air right now. What would you recommend I do? And I tell them, hang on, it's about to get real ugly. And they're like, well, that's not very compassionate. Well, what am I supposed to do? Because here's the thing. If you make bad choices, you're going to create all sorts of unnecessary suffering in your life. And listen, this is why Christians are so adamant about the Bible. People are like, the Bible, this and the Bible, that's the old book. Listen, the Bible is the framework for how to live in harmony with the seen and the unseen realities of our existence. It's the only one. Jesus came and lived it, and in the Bible we have to evaluate. And here's the thing. If you were to follow just the basic 10 commandments, most of the suffering in the world would be done with. Just don't lie. Don't lie to yourself. Don't steal. Don't cheat. Here's one. People say, well, what somebody asked the other day about, well, where is there in the Bible, don't be addicted to drugs? And I said, well, here it is. The first one, the first command, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And you know what? Whenever you have anything that you're looking to get something fulfilled to fulfill you, that's apart from God, you've created an idol. Because deep inside, you've got this thing, you're like, I just need this. I need a man to make me complete. Maybe that man has become your idol. I need to have this to be complete, or I feel so bad about myself. I'm going to drink this alcohol. It always makes me feel a little bit better. Liquid courage, as they call it. If you're depending on that to get something that only God should give, your source of courage should be fear of the Lord. If you're depending on that, I'm preaching hard. Sorry here, guys, but this is the reality of what this comes down to. Everything God asks of you is for your good if you'll just believe him. All of the 10 commandments, if we would just follow those, man, it would make life a lot easier. But here's the thing. You will follow, if you do follow the Bible, there's also suffering that comes with that. But I call that necessary suffering. In Acts, it says, through much suffering, we must enter the kingdom of God. Jesus set the example. You look at his life, they're like, he was a perfect man. Yeah, he was the only perfect man. And look what they did to him. There's all sorts of suffering that comes in our life that we need. And I don't like that. I wish it was just unicorns and sunshine, but it's not. There's something that God says, like it says through suffering we are transferred. In fact, there's this weird verse that says Jesus learned obedience through what he suffered. Like what? Huh? Jesus was perfect, but yet there was something he had to learn through what he suffered. And I don't understand. It's a deep theological concept. I've heard some takes on it, but the bottom line is this. You don't get around suffering, but you can avoid a lot of suffering in your life, the unnecessary stuff, by just seeking the Lord's order and his guidance on what he says he wants you to do. And it'll create a lot of unnecessary suffering, because I talk to people all the time. And afterwards I'm like, listen, I feel for you, but did you check with anybody before you did that? Well, no, I just thought it'd be a good idea. I'm like, yeah, you didn't seek wise counsel. And one of the things Proverbs talks about, you got to seek wise counsel. People going out doing crazy stuff and losing all this money doing these crazy things. Like, did you check with anybody? No. I was I'm a pretty smart guy. Yeah, well, didn't work out very well for you. It's like, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll make your path straight. It's one of those verses, and we quote it and we say, yeah, but how much are we trusting in the Lord with our own heart? Or how much have we made our own understanding the God that we've put before him? Now, I know I sound like a hellfire and brimstone preacher, but I'm telling you, this is what I live with every day in helping people get through the challenges they've created. So much of it is unnecessary suffering. And here's the thing, God can redeem it, but it may be really painful in the process. And I would love you to have pain that when you go through it, you say, you know what, this is suffering I'm incurring because I did the right thing. Because you're not get around suffering. You're not going to get around it. But when you do it with this, there's like a meaning to it. And as Viktor Frankl said, in some way, suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds its meaning. And when you've done the right thing and you know you're following the Lord and then you suffer for it, you say, okay, clearly there's something God wants to teach me through this. But when you do dumb things, you're going to learn something, maybe. Some people tend to do the same thing over and over again, but so much of it's unnecessary. So that's my little side warning. Listen, God's going to take everything you've done and turn it for your good, but you can avoid a lot of pain in the process. And that's what wisdom does. It helps you avoid a lot of the pain. And don't get all, some people, they abuse grace by saying, well, God's going to turn it for good. I'm just going to do whatever I want. And I say, yeah, but you're going to be hurt a lot in the process. You're going to come out with bruises and scars you don't need to have. Does that make sense? All right, y'all are really quiet, so I know that means you're listening. So we make these choices, right? And it shifts your mindset when you start to recognize that God is actually always working in your life. And that's what Paul says. I love this verse. He writes this from prison to the Philippians. He says, guys, I want you to know something. My dear brothers and sisters, everything that happened to me here in this prison, it's helped to spread the good news. For everyone here, including the whole palace guard, all the guards around me in the jail, they know that I'm in chains because of Christ. And because of my imprisonment, most of the believers here, they've gained confidence and boldly speak God's message without fear. Now talk about reframing. Here's a dude who literally felt invincible. Even in a prison cell, he's like, hey, if this is where God has me, I'm going to make sure all these guys walk out knowing I'm here because of Jesus. And I'm going to convert a lot of them. And he encouraged his brothers. I mean, this is the fascinating thing about Paul. Most of the books of the Bible that he wrote, that you read in your Bible, he wrote from prison. You literally become invincible when you start to say, okay, God, I've been obeying you. This stinks where I'm at right now. I don't like it, but I'm going to take advantage of every moment because I know that you're working all things together for my good. So even if I'm in a prison cell, you ain't going to keep me down. I'm going to start writing the Bible. You're not going to write the Bible, but he did. And in every situation you're in, that's the place we get to. Now, here's the thing. There are some things on this side of the space-time continuum that we're never going to understand. And this is where it's so important to recognize that we're living for something beyond this life. In fact, one of my favorite things Paul ever said is this. He said, if in this life only if in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied. if this really is all there is, and we're living by this higher standard, trying to be noble people, but there's nothing that comes after it, we're stupid. Really. And that's why the world looks at us. Sometimes they say, well, Christianity, I mean, Marx said this, it's the opiate of the masses. It's a drug for people that are weak because they look for some pie in the sky. They're going to be swept up one day and everything's going to be perfect. No. Listen, this is the reality of what we're dealing with here. If all we've got in this life is Christ for just this life and there's nothing in the afterlife, you really should look at us pretty pathetically, because what we should be doing is eat, drink, and be merry because you're going to die. But we say, no. This is just a tiny picture right here. What's going on here, this time on earth, is nothing compared to the eternity that we're going to spend with God. And that's why you've got to have an eternal perspective, guys. You look around at things and you say, this world is so messed up. Yes, it is. But here's the thing. It ain't going to stay that way forever. And how you respond right now in your mind to what's going on here is going to make a difference in how you live, and how you live here sets up what you live in eternity. This is preparation for eternity. It's all preparation, because one of these days, I love this verse, the king is going to come. And when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, after destroying every rule and every authority and power, he will reign until he puts all of his enemies under his feet. There's going to come a day where Jesus shows up. It says he's going to show up wearing all white, and he's going to engage with all of the forces of darkness. I've heard somebody said, if you show up to a fight wearing white, you're pretty confident how things are going to go down. He shows up and he's like, all right, guys, enough of this. It's time to set things right. And he takes it and he subjects everything. It says God puts all things in subject to him. The last enemy to be destroyed will be death. That's the greatest thing we have to fear, right? Death, the end. But we don't have to fear it. Because even in death, this is just a tiny glimpse of what our whole destiny is, our eternal destiny of walking and ruling and reigning with the Lord. And you've got to keep that in mind. That's got to be the framework for your mindset. You've got to be thinking, you know what? This world isn't all there is. There's more out there. And the stuff that doesn't make sense, Paul saw those, you'll see some things start to make sense, but there may be some things you go, why? And it may not be until you see Jesus' face when he comes and put things under subjection to him. He says, all things are put in subjection. It's plain that he's expected who put things in subjection under him. And when all things are put under him, then the Son himself will put himself before God himself, that God may be all in all. That's where things are going. So here's my encouragement to you. We've been, these lofty concepts of living for eternity. So what do you do tomorrow? When you wake up, the alarm goes off and you're like, I got to go to work. And I hate my boss. Right? That's the thing about this. Sometimes we talk about these lofty concepts. You're like, but how does that reflect in how I live my life? Well, here's what I'm talking about. If everything we're doing is preparation for something else, it's basically like if you were sitting in a classroom and the teacher said, hey, this is going to be on the test. What do? You start paying attention, right? You go, oh, this is going to be on the test. I need to pay attention here. This is important. If we really believe that God is preparing everything in our lives for an appointed time and an appointed destiny, then everything going on in your life is preparation. So you better pay attention. Don't check out. Don't give up. Don't get resentful and bitter and angry. Say, okay, God, something's up here and I'm confident that you're working. So I'm going to pay attention to what's going on here. And it may be as simple as this. Maybe God was going to have you in charge of that office one day, and he wants to give you a really great example of what not to do. And that's what your boss is. I will never do that when I'm the boss, right? It may be as simple as I don't want it. I'm not going to do it that way. But if you check out and you just get all bitter and resentful and you don't transform your mind and say, okay, God's working something here. He's preparing me for something great. It's a whole different mindset. God's preparing me for something great. Transform your mind to recognize that he's working all things to good. So that's my final point here. You can change your interpretation and your mindset in light of this promise. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. But it starts right here. It starts right here with what you're thinking. I heard a story about this family, and they had two boys. And one boy was just always optimistic, just everything, just optimism. And another one was always pessimistic. And they're like, we've got to balance these kids out a little bit. Like our optimistic son, we need to let him see that life is hard. And their pessimistic son, they're like, we need to lift up his spirits a little bit. So they they brought the pessimistic son out on Christmas and they said, hey, son, look, we got you a motorcycle. And the son was like, oh, man, I know it's going to break down soon. My friend has a motorcycle. It's always breaking down. Thanks. They're like, we bought the kid a motorcycle. He's just, the way he looks, he's just kind of sad. And their other son, the optimistic one, they brought him out and they showed him a pile of manure. And they said, son, we got you some manure. And his face lit up. He was like, oh, yes. And they said, no, son, that's horse poop. And he goes, I know, but with this much manure, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. And I think that's an example of how we as Christians can live our life. You look around your world right now and you go, wow, it's messed up. There's a bunch of crap everywhere. Sorry, I don't think pastors should say that, but I did it. Anyway, you look at it and you could easily go, oh no, this is so bad. And you become angry and resentful and project all your anger and hatred and this and that and all that. Or you could say, wow, this is so bad. There's got to be something good on the other side of this. Because God works for the good of those who love him, and I love him. So he's working everything according to his purpose in my life. And guys, this has never been more true in your life probably than what we're living through right now. As you look around at the chaos, if you look at the chaos in your own life and you say, why? Listen to me. You need to reframe it. The picture there, God's still accomplishing his work in your life. The picture isn't damaged. The frame you're looking at it through may have a big crack across it. So you just change the frame. Reframe it. And when you start reframing everything, you become invincible. Because nobody can take, it's up to you what goes on in here. It's all in your power. And the cool thing is, you can make the change right now. You don't have to wait for anything. You can begin today and say, God, I believe you're working all things together for good. I'm going to reframe every situation that I'm going through. And here's the thing. You may reframe yourself right into dying. But we've already shown that we're not living for this planet anyways. We're living for the eternity that God has, the glorious destiny he has. And everything that we're going through right now is, he says, preparing in us an eternal weight of glory, which far outweighs everything we've seen up to this point. So reframe it. Whatever's happening, that situation at work, man, God, I can't believe I have to work for this guy, but I know I'm supposed to be here. So I'm going to reframe it. I'm going to see everything I should not do as a leader. In your marriage, maybe your marriage has fallen apart and you've tried to restore it. You say, okay, God, I've done my part. I've done the best that I can. I want my marriage to be restored, but I don't know what's going on here, but I'm trusting that you're going to somehow work this together for good. And evaluate. Maybe there's some things you need to fix in you. Maybe there's some things you need to fix to stop that unnecessary suffering. But when you put yourself in line with what God is doing and you start to see things the way he does with that eternal perspective, like there's something good coming out of this, you can shift your mindset even in the middle of the most difficult situations. And we need this right now. The world is in such a dark place. And we need people who are light. And people look at you and say, you're so weird, but I want that. How can you be so optimistic? You're like almost naively optimistic. No, I'm not naively optimistic. I just know that I'm not, this world isn't my home. I'm living for an eternal weight of glory. There's some cool stuff coming. And here's the thing. I believe that right now, even in the middle of what we're going through right now, something big is on the horizon. And you can sit here and moan and be resentful and angry and bitter that things didn't work out for you the way it was supposed to this year. Or you could say, it's so bad, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. And then you become that person that's a light and people are like, why are you so positive and optimistic? Well, I'm so positive and optimistic because I know God works all things together for my good and I'm one of his, and you need to get in the boat here so that you can have everything work together for your good. And that's how we let our light shine before men, that they may see our good works and glorify our Father in heaven. This is real, like in the trenches stuff, y'all. This is where you decide, are you going to live for this and all the stuff you see? Because if you do, it's not going to go well. Or are you going to get your mind transformed? Like Paul says, transformed to the renewing of your mind so that you can look for God's will and what he's doing around you, because he's always at work. He hasn't forgotten you. He has not abandoned you. He is working behind the scenes doing 10,000 things in your life right now. Do you guys receive that? Let me pray for you.
If you are ever in the Seguin area, come visit us on Sunday mornings at 9 or 11 a.m. Or you can just download our app and receive our weekly messages right to your phone. Just text CC Seguin to 77977 and click on the link that you receive. May the remainder of your week be enriched with God's favor and blessings.